it is, and to better understand all of that, the implications and the incentives for the international economy, is William Lee, chief economist at the Milken Institute. Bill, thanks so much for being with us tonight. We're happy to have you, especially given your background with the IMF, the Citibank, Federal Reserve. You've done a lot of this work. It's great to have you here.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Amarit. This is a very exciting time to be here.
It really is. It's a perfect time to have you on the show. I mean, when you think about this pause for 90 days, the 10% blanket still sort of in effect on some of these tariffs, but then the China up to 125% aggregate. Where do you see this all going? Where do you see the chessboard laying right now?
You know, if you remember when the tariffs first were put in place, everyone said, oh, my God, what's he doing? He's going to destroy the world. And I have to remind our audience that as a card-carrying economist in good standing, no economist ever says tariffs are good. And I don't think they're good things either. But used in the right way, they can do a lot of good things. I like to use the metaphor of a doctor that discovers that his patient has atrial fibrillation. One of the drugs he's going to prescribe almost immediately is Coumadin, which is a blood thinner to prevent clots. Of course, do you realize that Coumadin is a rat poison, and in too much of a dose, it'll kill you. But in the right therapy package and at the right doses, a cardiologist will use Coumadin as a very important part of that therapy package to get the patient healthy again. And that's exactly what Donald Trump has done. Remember, he was elected with the Make America Great agenda. The MAGA agenda is one where he promised to reduce the size of government, lower taxes, have fewer regulations, and most importantly, to incentivize foreign investors and domestic investors to develop a lot of new factories and new facilities that employ people in high-paying jobs. That's the ultimate goal: raise the domestic production and income of the U.S. economy. And tariffs are just one tool of doing that. The deal that he offered all of the people around the world is that, look, you want to be a partner with us, you come into the United States, build factories here, employ American people in your factories and in your workplaces, and we're going to give you lower income taxes, lower regulations, a very healthy domestic economy and marketplace, and we're going to give you protection, a tariff wall, so that your foreign competitors will have a harder time competing with you. And if you choose to compete with the United States, we're going to put a tariff wall there, and you're going to have to pay to have access to the U.S. economy, because the U.S. economy is the best marketplace in the world. And for investors out there, it's always been the place of innovation that gives you the highest rate of return. So that was the MAGA deal in September. That's what got everyone so crazy optimistic, and stock markets went up, right? But everyone said, oh, my God, now all these tariffs are causing so much uncertainty. I personally think that the reason why the market stumbled in the last 2 months or so is because people started thinking, wow, he's using up a lot of political capital. And maybe we won't be able to get the most important parts of that package through: fewer regulations, lower taxes, and smaller government. And I think that's the source of the market volatility.
Yeah, I mean, well, the market soared today, and in part maybe on the back of this news of this 90-day pause. And it is bring up this really interesting point. I mean, President Trump is pausing in part because he says he wants to be able to negotiate this sort of bespoke bilateral agreements that he can have one by one, and he wants to be in the room, as his Treasury Secretary said, so it's got to go through him. And all this really brings up this idea of the bilateral one-on-one agreement versus the multilateral trade agreements that we've seen in the past. And so just talk about the friction points, right, that we might see in bilateral agreements, the pros and cons of it, because this is setting up a world where we pull out of these agreements, as we've seen President Trump talking about.
That's a brilliant point. In fact, one of the things that I want to remind everybody is that the WTO trade system that was set up right after World War II was set up by the United States because the world had to recover from World War II, and there was only one healthy economy in the world. That was the United States. But now in the 21st century, China and the United States are the two largest economies in the world. Europe is healthy. You have healthy middle-class countries in Latin America and in the Middle East. So you have this whole array of countries that want to trade with one another, want to be able to exchange things with one another. And that WTO system really is creaking and really has to be reformed. In fact, Donald Trump has said for decades now, even when he was in private sector, it had to be blown up because it was unfair to the United States, because we were giving so many concessions. And I think what he's done with these reciprocal tariffs is to demonstrate to everybody around the world, hey, this is what the U.S. is facing, right? It's not the tariffs that are so much the issue, it's the non-tariff barriers. Because what people have discovered is that you sneak around the rules of WTO that are very anti-tariff and put in all sorts of quotas, legal restrictions, health standards, all sorts of legal hurdles that our companies have to go through in order to sell things in other countries. Those are the things that have to be changed. What Donald Trump has also said, and what you said was really very, very insightful, because unlike President Biden, who wanted to collect people together into a big table with 20, 30 countries to hammer out a new trade deal, Donald Trump recognized that the first thing you learn in political science class is about the tyranny of the minority, right? There's only one country can hold up agreement to a large group of countries. So what Donald Trump favors are these bilateral deals, small group deals, to restructure supply chains. And that is exactly what he's done, right? And
well, if I could just jump in, though, when we think about that, and especially as we talk about China a little bit, I mean, a lot of the critics of this tariff regime that President Trump is talking about, and even this potential for this array of bilateral deals, they say, for one, you get the spaghetti bowl effect. It's going to be way too complicated with all these different overlapping regulations, one by one, and that's why multilateral agreements work, because you get more trade going. I mean, unless you want to totally pull out of global trade. But also, there's also this idea about China. I mean, if the United States becomes seen as erratic, or just relying on this one person, do people go to the arms of China, which, as you know, there's a lot of these manufacturing plants that are coming online. They're going to flood the world with their goods, and they're building up all these relationships. So if this trade war happens between the U.S. and China, I mean, aren't those the risks of what President Trump is doing? I
think today demonstrated that thesis, although it sounds reasonable, is wrong. Today we had the choice that countries can go to China and make bilateral deals and even regional deals with China, and some of them have already, in order to shift their supply lines from the U.S. to China. Now, what you notice is that 75 countries have immediately come to the United States and said, hey, we want to negotiate with you. So 75 countries in one day have demonstrated that it's the U.S. that they want as a customer, not so much China. And I think that says a lot about the attractiveness of the U.S. over China, and fears that China will take over all of the existing contracts with the United States.
Yeah, I mean, at the very least, people want to make sure that their people at home are able to get the goods that they're used to from the United States and have some degree of trade. So that's one good reason for negotiating. We'll have to see where it all goes from a China standpoint. I mean, obviously, this is starting to heat up in terms of being potentially a trade war. But another one of the theses that you provided for President Trump's tariff plan is this idea to stoke domestic production. But there's not a phased-in process to these tariffs, right? There haven't been offsets. So if it's so abrupt, and again, it was just in effect for a few hours, and we'll see what happens out of these negotiations. But if the tariffs do go back in, do you think the Trump administration might consider having them phase in to some degree to offset some of the pain that might come immediately from the imposition of such hard sledgehammer tariffs right away? Because it's going to take years for these domestic manufacturing plants to come up and for companies to be convinced to invest. And maybe President Trump isn't even president by the time 4 years, 5 years from now. And then what happens then?
Well, Amrit, I think it's very intuitive to say we need a phase in so we can get used to where the new tariffs are going to be. But one substitute for phase in is negotiations. That is, if an outside producer can negotiate a contract with the United States and say, look, I will build plants here and I will invest capital in the United States if you give me these tax cuts and deregulatory environments and ensure me my customer base, you won't need to worry about the tariffs that are coming up in the future, right? Because you're already under the tariff barrier. And I think that negotiation is really what's involved here. You know, it's absolutely true that not everything will be produced in the United States. You'll always have to import some of your inputs, right? Some of the parts you need to build the stuff here in the United States. And that's part
Bill,
of the deal. That's part of the negotiation. You can make exceptions to items for the tariffs.
Yeah, Bill, you know, we just took a hit to your signal, and we're actually just beginning to run out of time. But it's a fascinating conversation. There's so many different aspects to the plan that I'd like to keep on talking to you about. Hopefully, we'll have you back sometime soon. Thanks for coming on. A really big night for the international economy and for tariffs, and thanks for speaking to it so clearly. Really appreciate having you here.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, Bill Lee of the Milken Institute, a think tank that thinks a lot about this sort of stuff. And as you can see, I mean, there is a case for what we're seeing with the Trump administration, these tariffs. The negotiations will be the key, and we'll all stay tuned to find out which is the way. In fact, you stay tuned. We're coming up on ITI. Stay with us.